If a rogue wave had hit the Cyclops, I believe she would have quickly rolled and that she would have probably slipped below the surface and would eventually wind up the seabed.
The USS Cyclops was the beast of the American Navy, a ship that could swallow entire fleets with its fuel capacity. But in 1918, it sailed into the Atlantic and simply ceased to exist. No wreckage, no bodies, no distress signal.
That's the largest loss of life on board a U.S. Navy vessel that's unexplained.
For a century, we thought we knew the story. We blamed the Bermuda Triangle, giant squids, and even German spies. But the truth is hiding in a detail so small yet so terrifying that it changes everything. 306 people didn't just die, they were erased by a mistake that is still haunting engineers today. The Titan of the Atlantic. To understand the sheer scale of this horror, you first have to understand the beast itself. The USS Cyclops wasn't just a boat. She was a monster of the industrial age. Commissioned in 1910, she was one of the Navy's Proteus-class colliers, designed to be the lifeline of the fleet. At 542 feet long, she was a floating mountain of steel and coal. To put that in perspective, she was larger than most battleships of her time. Her job was to feed the fires of the American war machine, carrying thousands of tons of fuel across the globe. When she docked in Rio de Janeiro in early 1918, she was an imposing sight. The world was on fire with the Great War, and the Atlantic Ocean had become a graveyard of ships, sinking under the torpedoes of German U-boats. But the Cyclops felt safe. She was too big to fail, too massive to be bullied by the ocean. Or so the crew thought. She was preparing for a run back to Baltimore, Maryland. But this wasn't a normal supply run, it was a mission that would become legend. The atmosphere in Rio was tense, the heat was oppressive, and the crew was restless. They were far from home, tired of the war and dealing with a ship that was showing signs of age. But the real problem wasn't the ship's age, it was the cargo she was about to take on. The American steel mills were desperate for manganese, a dense heavy metal ore used to make munitions. They needed it to build the guns and shells that would win the war in Europe. The Cyclops was ordered to fill her belly with this rock. Workers spent days pouring 10,800 tons of manganese ore into her holds. It was a chaotic scene, with dust filling the air and the massive cranes groaning under the weight. But there was something wrong. This wasn't coal. Coal is bulky but relatively light. Manganese is dense. It is heavy. It sits low and hard. As they loaded the ship, she began to sink lower and lower into the water, past her safety lines. But the order was given. The war effort couldn't wait. On February 16, 1918, she cast off her lines. The massive propellers churned the water, and the Cyclops began her long journey north. She was heavy, sluggish, and packed with 306 men, sailors, officers, and a few passengers. As she slipped over the horizon, no one on the docks of Rio knew they were watching a funeral procession. The ship was sailing straight into the history books, not as a hero, but as a ghost. But here is the catch. The ocean didn't just take her. The silence that followed her disappearance was so complete, so absolute, that it birthed 100 nightmares. The Mad Captain. Every good mystery needs a villain, and in the story of the Cyclops, that role is played by her commander, Lieutenant Commander George W. Worley. If you were writing a movie script, you couldn't invent a character more chaotic or suspicious than Worley. He wasn't your typical polished naval officer. He was a man wrapped in rumors, fear, and erratic behavior that bordered on madness. Worley was born in Germany as Johann Friedrich Weichmann. He had changed his name when he came to America, a common practice, but in the middle of a war with Germany, this detail made people nervous. The crew didn't trust him. In fact, many of them despised him. He was known for a harsh, abusive style of leadership. Sailors whispered stories about him wandering the decks in his long underwear, wearing a derby hat, carrying a cane that he wasn't afraid to use. This wasn't just eccentricity, it was toxicity. There were reports that he would chase ensigns around the deck with a pistol when he was in a foul mood. He was paranoid, constantly accusing his officers of conspiring against him. The ship was a powder keg of human emotion. You had a crew that hated their captain, a captain who thought everyone was a traitor, and a war that made everyone suspicious of spies. As the Cyclops steamed north, Worley's behavior reportedly got worse. He was drinking heavily, according to some accounts, and his orders became unpredictable. He would change course for no reason or scream at men for minor infractions. The morale on board was at rock bottom. Imagine being trapped on a steel island in the middle of the ocean with a man who might be losing his mind. It is the perfect recipe for a disaster. But was he just a bad captain, or was he something darker? This is where the first wild theory starts to take shape. Because of his German heritage and his strange behavior, many people back home began to whisper the T word: traitor. Could the disappearance of the Cyclops be an inside job? The traitor theory. Let's dive into the rabbit hole. The year is 1918. Anti-German sentiment in America is at a fever pitch. Neighbors are reporting neighbors as spies. And here you have the captain of a major U.S. Navy ship born in Germany acting like a lunatic. The theory goes like this: George Worley wasn't crazy. He was a sleeper agent. The idea is that Worley was waiting for the perfect moment to hand the Cyclops over to the Kaiser. Think about it. The ship was carrying manganese, a vital resource for the war. Depriving the U.S. of that metal would be a huge blow, but capturing the ship intact, that would be a massive prize for Germany. The theory suggests that Worley coordinated with a German U-boat or a surface raider. He sailed the ship to a predetermined rendezvous point, signaled the enemy, and surrendered. This would explain the silence. No SOS because the captain ordered the radio room to stay quiet. No wreckage because the ship wasn't sunk right there. It was sailed to a German port or scuttled in secret after the cargo was transferred. It sounds like a spy thriller, doesn't it? There were even rumors that Worley was seen in Germany after the war, living a comfortable life. Of course, there is zero hard evidence for this. No German records ever mention capturing the Cyclops. In fact, German naval logs from the time show no U-boats in that specific area that could have taken a ship of that size. But the theory persists because it fits the human need for a villain. We want to believe that a human hand was behind the tragedy rather than just bad luck. But if it wasn't the captain betraying the crew, maybe it was the crew betraying the captain. Mutiny on the high seas. If the captain was a tyrant, what happens when the oppressed reach their breaking point? We know the crew was miserable. We know Worley was abusive. Is it possible that the Cyclops was the stage for a violent mutiny that went horribly wrong? Picture the scene. The ship is days out of Barbados. The captain is drunk, waving his gun, threatening the men. Someone snaps. A group of sailors, maybe led by a junior officer who couldn't take it anymore, decides to relieve Worley of command. They storm the bridge. There is a scuffle. Shots are fired. Worley goes down, or maybe he is thrown overboard into the dark Atlantic. Now you have a ship run by mutineers. They are panicked. They have eliminated a commanding officer, which is a crime punishable by death. They can't go back to Baltimore. They can't go to a friendly port. Panic sets in. Arguments break out. In the chaos of a mutiny, no one is navigating the ship properly. They veer off course, heading deeper into the uncharted waters of the Atlantic. Perhaps they decided to scuttle the ship to hide the evidence of their crime, hoping to escape in lifeboats and claim the ship sank by accident. But something goes wrong. The scuttling charges go off too early, or they open the sea valves and the water rushes in too fast. The ship, already heavy and unstable, rolls over and sinks before they can launch the boats. It is a gruesome theory, but it fits the psychological profile of the ship. A pressure cooker waiting to explode. However, just like the spy theory, there is a lack of physical proof. But there is one detail that adds fuel to this fire: the stop in Barbados. When the Cyclops stopped in Barbados on March 3rd to resupply, the U.S. consul Brockholst Livingston sent a very strange report back to Washington. He mentioned the captain was damned generally by the crew and hinted at serious trouble. He wrote, "There are plenty of rumors." It was almost as if he knew something bad was about to happen. Was he sensing the mutiny brewing? But what if the enemy wasn't on the ship at all? What if the enemy was the ocean itself? The Triangle of Doom. Now we have to talk about the elephant in the room. The USS Cyclops didn't just disappear anywhere, it disappeared in the area that would later become famous as the Bermuda Triangle. In fact, the loss of the Cyclops is often cited as the first major mystery of the Triangle. This is where the theories go from wild to absolutely out of this world. For decades, believers have pointed to the Cyclops as proof that there is something supernatural happening in that patch of ocean between Miami, Bermuda, and Puerto Rico. The Hoodoo Sea, as it was called back then. The theories here are endless. Some say it was a magnetic anomaly. The triangle is one of the few places on Earth where a compass points to true north instead of magnetic north. Could this have confused the navigators? Did the compass spin wildly, leading them in circles until they ran out of fuel and drifted into oblivion? Then there are the rogue waves. The Atlantic can produce waves that are 80 or 100 feet tall, walls of water that appear out of nowhere. A ship the size of the Cyclops could be snapped like a twig by a wave that big. But a rogue wave leaves debris. It smashes things. It doesn't make them vanish. So let's get weirder. What about the electronic fog? This is a theory popularized by later survivors of the Triangle who claimed to fly into a strange, glowing cloud where time seemed to speed up or slow down. Did the Cyclops sail into a time slip? Did it enter a portal that transported it to another dimension or another time? It sounds like science fiction, but when you have zero wreckage, the human mind starts to invent impossible answers to fill the void. And of course, there is the Atlantis theory. Some claim that ancient technology from the lost city of Atlantis is buried deep under the ocean floor in that area, firing energy beams that disrupt ships and planes. Was the Cyclops zapped by a 10,000-year-old death ray? It is fun to speculate, but there is a theory that bridges the gap between science and the supernatural. Methane hydrates. The ocean floor in that region is rich in methane gas trapped in ice. If a massive pocket of gas were to bubble up to the surface, it would turn the water into a frothy, low-density soup. A ship floating on that bubbly water would suddenly lose its buoyancy and drop like a stone. It would be swallowed by the ocean in seconds, and as the gas dispersed, the water would close up over it, leaving no trace. But here is the catch. The ocean is full of monsters, real and imagined. The monster of the deep. In 1918, sailors were still superstitious. They told stories of the Kraken, the giant squid, the monsters that lurked in the abyss. While we know the Kraken is a myth, giant squids are very real. They can grow to massive sizes. Could a colossal squid have attacked the Cyclops? It is unlikely a squid could sink a 500-foot steel ship. But what if it wasn't an animal, but a monster of a different kind? The name of the ship itself, Cyclops, refers to the one-eyed giant of Greek mythology. Sailors are notoriously superstitious about names. There is a belief that the ship was cursed from the start. In fact, the Cyclops had sister ships, the USS Proteus and the USS Nereus. And here is where the curse of the colliers gets truly spooky. Years later, in World War II, both the Proteus and the Nereus were transporting heavy loads of ore in the Atlantic. And guess what? They both vanished. No SOS, no wreckage, no survivors, just like the Cyclops. 3 sister ships, 3 disappearances, 3 mysteries. The odds of that happening by accident are astronomical. It makes you wonder if there was a flaw in the very DNA of these ships, a genetic defect in their steel bones that doomed them all. Was it a curse or was it a blueprint for disaster? The wild theories are fascinating. They give us spies, aliens, and sea monsters. They make for a great story around a campfire. But the reality? The reality is terrifying because it doesn't need magic to eliminate 300 people. It just needs gravity. The engineering nightmare. Let's strip away the myths and look at the cold, hard facts that keep modern naval engineers awake at night. The Cyclops was carrying 10,800 tons of manganese ore. We mentioned earlier that this stuff is dense, but we didn't explain exactly what that does to a ship in a storm. The Cyclops was a collier. She was built to carry coal. Coal is lighter. When you fill the holds with coal, it supports the structure of the ship evenly. But when you put heavy, dense manganese in there, you can't fill the holds to the top. The weight limit is reached while the holds are still mostly empty. This creates free surface effect if the cargo shifts, but more importantly, it creates concentrated stress points.